Okay. All right. Shabbat shalom. We are going to be looking at some things in Leviticus and also in Galatians. Continuing on with our look through the triennial Torah portion. We want to look at a couple of things in Leviticus 25, the end of the chapter. We looked at the first part of the chapter last week. We want to finish up with the rest here today, and also compare it with some of the things that we'll see in Galatians chapter 4. We will look at a couple things. I want to look at Leviticus 25, starting with the 39th verse. You can really just look down for now. To 41. So verse 39 says, if a countryman of yours becomes so poor with regard to you that he sells himself to you, you shall not subject him to a slave's service. He shall be with you as a hired man, as if he were a sojourner. He shall serve with you until the year of Jubilee. He shall then go out from you, he and his sons with him, and shall go back to his family, that he may return to the property of his forefathers. So, dealing with, when we look at this, we talked about this a little bit last week in terms of the countryman, who is in the Hebrew, the word is ak, which is your brother, your countryman, another Israelite. If he becomes so poor with regard to you, I would assume that's dealing with the idea of being indebted to another countryman for whatever reason. That's the only way that somebody can become poor in regards to you. If another brother becomes indebted to you, so much so that he sells himself to you, it says, you shall not subject him to a slave's service. A slave's service. Let me just look that real quick. Stop. 39. Compel him to serve as a bond servant. Adoba abo aboda. Bond servant. That's actually a kind of a compound word there.
Dad, where did you stop at?
What?
Where did you stop at?
I just read to 40, 43, I think. 42, 40. Okay, so looking at the countryman again, the brother, if he becomes indebted to you, he's not to compel him to serve as a slave, as a bond servant.
Forever.
Well, it's forever, but it says as a hired servant, which is a whole other thing. A sakir, a man at wages. So it's not as if he can work. He can't work for nothing. He can't work as a slave. He can't be in the status even as a slave. He can only be this sakir, which is a man at wages by the day or the year, a hired man or servant or a hireling. So there's a difference in the status of a countryman as opposed to someone that wasn't a countryman. And in 40, in regards to the hired servant, it says, but as a hired servant, as a settler, he is with you and serves you until the year of Yovel. So, again, this is not a thing that's forever. He can be redeemed, at a time. He can be set back in, restored his former position, his former status can be restored after the year of Yovel, the year of Jubilee, which of course we went over last week. So in regards to the countryman, him and his family and all can be returned back to their rightful place at some point. Is not a status of slavery. It's not a status of bond servitude, but it's a status of being a hired servant, someone that's actually paid for their wages. And again, 41, where it says in 41, and then he shall leave you, he and his children with him, and shall return to his own clan, even return to the possession of his fathers. For they are my servants, whom I brought out of the land of Mitzrayim. They are not to be sold as slaves. So we see that a certain treatment is always should always be used towards the as it says, the countryman, the brother, the one who is an Israelite, not to be sold as slaves. It says 43, do not rule over him with harshness, but you shall fear Elohim. We always see that there is an attention to the treatment of these servants, these slaves, these hired paid workers here that in Israel. We think about slavery here in this country, we always think of this horrible, terrible thing, right? But in the thought process of Israel, when we see the word slave here, it's a whole other kind of a situation. It's not dealing with
trying to treat them like they're not human beings.
Well, yeah, it's not dealing with this thing that we know as slavery here in this country. Okay. Let's see here. Now, if we go down to Hiskey, read from 47 down to 50. Read from 47 down to the next chapter, verse 2.
And if a sojourner or stranger wax rich by thee, and thy brother that dwelleth by him wax poor, and sell himself unto the stock of the stranger's family. Wait. After that he is sold, he may be redeemed again. One of his brethren may redeem him. Either his uncle or his uncle's son may redeem him, or any that is nigh of kin unto him of his family may redeem him. Or if he be able, he may redeem himself, and he shall reckon with him that bought him from the year that he was sold to him unto the year of Jubilee. And the price of his sale shall be according unto the number of years, according to the time of the hired servant shall it be with him. If there be yet many years behind according unto them, he shall give again the price of his redemption out of the money that was bought for. And if there remain but few years unto the year of Jubilee, then he shall count with him, and according unto his years shall he give him again the price of his redemption. And as a yearly hired servant shall he be with him, and the other shall not rule with rigor over him in thy sight. And if he be not redeemed in these years, then he shall go out in the year of Jubilee, both he and his children with him. For unto me the children of Israel are servants. They are my servants, whom I brought forth out of the land Egypt. I am Elohim. I am Yahweh, your Elohim.
1 and 2.
Ye shall make you no idols, nor graven image, neither rear you up a standing image, neither shall ye set up any image of stone in your land to bow down unto it. For I am Yahweh, your Elohim.
2.
Ye shall keep my Sabbath and reverence my sanctuary. I am Yahweh.
Okay, very good. All right, so now is dealing with this, still dealing with the countrymen becoming poor, but now in regards to the sojourner, the foreigner who dwells among Israel. So he treated the countrymen the same way a countryman would treat a countryman in Israel if he became poor and had to become an indentured servant unto him. And then kind of just elaborates more on what we talked about last week with this whole prorating system that went on with the Jubilee year.
Stuff got cheaper.
You pay more or less depending on how close or far you were from the year of Jubilee. Not exactly sure which way the
It got cheaper.
pendulum swung. Does it say that?
It said that last week. But
Cheaper?
the closer you got to Jubilee, you had the servant the shorter amount of time, so it was cheaper.
Did it say cheaper though?
Yeah.
I don't remember.
That's what it said last week.
I take your word for it. Okay, so what? Again, we look at this just to kind of.
You want to know the verse?
Yeah. What's the verse?
Leviticus 25, verse 16. According to the multitude of years, thou shalt increase the price thereof, and according to the fewness of the years, thou shalt diminish the price.
Yeah.
Or according to the number of years of fruit that he sell unto thee.
So the closer you are, the less you pay.
Yeah, because you closer to the
further you are, the more you pay.
Yeah. So
there's probably like a whole number.
There's probably a system
that just gets smaller according to the much smaller. Get smaller the closer you get to percentages. It don't say exactly. I guess
it don't say exactly.
We wouldn't know, but we see the system is in place, and the laws are in place for the treatment of the Israelite. Oh, hold on. How we skip over 45? Read 45 and 46. Let's see. I'll just read it because you're not even. Then 2, verse 45. It is out of the sons of the sojourners who live as aliens among you that you may gain acquisition, and out of their families who are with you, whom they will have produced in your land, they also may become your possession. He may even bequeath them to your sons after you to receive as a possession. You can use them as permanent slaves, it says. But in respect to your own countrymen, the sons of Israel, you shall not rule with severity over one another. So when the shoe's on the other foot in Israel, it's not the same. There's a difference between how the sojourner, how the alien is treated when the shoe's on the other foot, as opposed to how the Israelite is treated. Doesn't matter who is the on the top end, whether it be a homeborn or a sojourner, the Israelite is always treated one way. If the Israelite is the one who's down on his luck, who becomes impoverished, if the Israelite becomes impoverished, regardless of if he becomes impoverished in regards to a sojourner or an Israelite, he always can. He does not become the possession of the individual.
The year of Jubilee, he gets released.
Yeah, he's always going to be released, and his family's released. He can always be redeemed, and his family too can be redeemed. But the alien, the sojourner, it says, can actually become the possession of Israel. What I want to take notice of, here, we look later in Galatians, is the the idea of being a slave, the idea of being this servant. In that time, at that time, you know, you have a different kind of a status. You are a countryman, but you kind of for that period, you kind of have a different kind of a status. You can get back to the place where you belong as far as your kind of
autonomy.
Huh?
Autonomy.
I wasn't gonna say autonomy.
What do you want to say?
I don't know, but that's not what I was gonna say.
Well, if you're not owned by someone,
you can return back to your former place. But you know, when you think about the idea of having things and having, if the individual could consider his inheritance, if he could consider his inheritance, that would have been something that he could have owned or could use as leverage or something to keep him out of the place that he ended up being in. It's kind of as if, you know, you get to this place where, you know, you don't have any, only thing I think of is, you know, having assets. You don't have anything. You become poor. You become thin. This word, Yamuk, you become impoverished in a place where you need, you know, to be taken in by your debtor. You're unable to fulfill your commitments, whatever they may be, and you need to be, you know, you need to work it off.
Taken care of.
You need to work your debt off, right? You become this.
But that's what we are. And I mean, you know, that's exactly what we are, indentured servants. If we have employers that we got to go to work.
That's crazy.
We have debts that we got to pay, right?
Right.
We have mortgages and car payments.
We're slaves to someone, right? So when we think about the idea of,
I mean, unless you're just
of servitude,
rich, or you have,
I mean, in this country, you still gotta pay money. If I own a bunch of land, I still gotta pay money to somebody for it, even though if it's technically mine. If I'm not like making payments on it,
you have to pay taxes.
I still gotta pay taxes, which in some places is a significant amount of money. You know what I mean? Depending on where you are.
But I'm just saying that you could have your own business and be independently wealthy and able to pay your taxes or whatever.
Right, but you still gotta pay somebody. Yeah. But I guess if we take taxes out of the picture, you know what I mean? Because in America, we always got to pay somebody something. It's not like here where the land was Yahweh's, right? He wasn't sitting up here doing all of that. But if we think about the fact that, you know, you have to go somewhere and you have to be subject to someone in order to get your, in order to, make your money, so that you can. We're indentured servants to somebody, right? Now, freedom would really be the place where you don't have to go to a place or a thing or a person for the things that you need, right? Freedom would be, you having the ability to not have to look to outside sources in order to be able to survive. Yeah. So we live in this type of servitude, and we see now there, and with these commands here, there are parameters and instructions given for how this stuff is carried out. But the thought, the idea that we want to think about is the idea of servitude versus freedom, being kind of bound or connected to a thing as a means of survival, as opposed to being free from all external forces in regards to your survival. So it's easy for us to be able to think about this when we think about the idea of going to work. You have to get up, you have to go to work, you have to do the work for these people who you're making money off of them, but at the end of the day, they're making a whole bunch of money off of you.
And you're doing it to pay off all your debts.
Right. Right. And you have all these debts, if you're a credit card person, you gotta pay. Credit cards is a good kind of a thing, as a where you have this credit. I'll buy this thing on credit and then pay for it later. When I guess when you think about it, well, I guess it's not, but it feels like you're paying twice for something. It feels like that, but I guess it's technically not. You get it for free and you pay it off on time, but it feels like sometimes it feels like you're paying for something 2 times. But it's this idea of you now being indebted to this thing or these people for a thing, as opposed to just versus money. I have this money and I can go and give it to this person and it's mine. Whether it's a car or it's a house or it's a iPad or whatever, right? I just go out and get the thing where I'm not indebted to anyone. Hey, I tell you what, that day when I walked out of the credit union that time and my truck was paid off, we had already paid off the other things. The truck was like the last thing to pay off. Then debt free, it feels kind of good. I mean, besides the fact that you have like extra money around, but we had we weren't totally free.
We had the mortgage,
but
that was the only thing.
Yeah, well, you're saying the only thing, but that's a big thing. But there's a freedom.
Thing.
There's a freedom that's there, right?
You're not tied to anything. Like,
right. You're not
obligated.
Down.
You don't have that obligation.
Right.
That's there.
Right. So looking forward, we want to kind of think about that idea of being obligated to something as opposed to being free from something, right? Just as we begin, we're going to look in Galatians and see, because Paul kind of brings up this kind of dichotomy of freedom versus bondage, and when we look at what he's dealing with, and we think about this idea of being a servant versus being free, it helps us to understand what he's dealing with, what he's talking about here. Again, I just wanted to kind of just do a quick little overview in Leviticus, just to have that at the forefront of our minds in terms of this idea of servitude versus freedom, right? So let's turn over to we're going to look at Galatians chapter 4, all the way up to 5 verse 1. So 4 verse 1 down to 5 verse 1. And we'll talk about a couple things there and relate it back to this slavery concept. Galatians 4 verse 1 all the way through 5 verse 1. Let's look at that.
Now I say that the hair as long as that the
heir, like the heir to the throne, like somebody who receives
that
something.
The heir, as long as he is a child, differeth nothing from a servant, though he be Yahweh of all. But master of all.
You want to read it?
Yes.
I'll read it. But it's under tutors and governors until the time appointed of the Father. Even so, we, when we were children, were in bondage under the elements of the world. But when the fullness of time was come, Elohim sent forth his Son, made of a woman, made under the law, to redeem them that were under the law, that we might receive the adoption of sons. And because ye are sons, Elohim has sent forth the Spirit of his Son into your hearts, crying, Abba, Father. Wherefore thou art no more a servant, but a son. And if a son, then the heir of Elohim through Mashiach. Howbeit then, when you knew not Elohim, ye did service unto them which by nature are no gods. But now after ye have known Elohim, or rather are known of Elohim, how turn ye again to the weak and beggarly elements, whereunto ye desire again to be in bondage? You observe days and months and times and seasons. I am afraid of you, lest I have bestowed upon you labor in vain. Brethren, I beseech you, be as I am, for I am as ye are. Ye have not injured me at all. Ye know how through infirmity of the flesh I preached the gospel unto you at the first. And my temptation, which was in my flesh, ye despised not nor rejected, but received me as an angel of Elohim, even as Mashiach Yeshua. Where is then the blessedness ye spake of? For I bear you record that if it had been possible, ye would have plucked out your own eyes and have given them to me. Am I therefore become your enemy because I tell you the truth? They zealously affect you, but not well. Yea, they will exclude you that you might affect them. But it is good to be zealously affected always in a good thing, and not only when I am present with you. My little children, of whom I travail in birth, again until Mashiach be formed in you. I desire to be present with you now, and to change my voice, for I stand in doubt of you. Tell me, ye that desire to be under the law, do you not hear the law? For it is written that Abraham had 2 sons, the one by a bondmaid, and the other by a free woman. But he who was of the bondwoman was born after the flesh, but he who was of the free woman was by promise. Which things are an allegory, for these are the 2 covenants, the one from Mount Sinai, which gender to bondage, which is Hagar. For this Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia, and answers to Jerusalem, which now is in bondage with her children. But Jerusalem which is above, is free, which is the mother of us all. For it is written, Rejoice, thou barren that bearest not. Break forth and cry, thou that travailest not. For the desolate hath many more than she which hath a husband. Now we, brethren, as Isaac was, are the children of the promise. But as then he that was born after the flesh persecuted him that was born after the spirit, even so it is now. Nevertheless, what saith the scripture? Cast out the bondwoman and her son, for the son of the bondwoman shall not be heir with the son of the free woman. So then, brethren, we are not children of the bondwoman, but of the free. Stand fast, therefore, in the liberty wherewith Mashiach hath made us free, and be not entangled again with the yoke of bondage. Behold, you want me to do it too?
Did I say 2?
You told me 2.
1.
One. Okay.
Yeah, just 1.
I thought you told me 2. Okay.
Okay, very good. So we go back and look at some things here, right? So when we look at back at the verse 1, where he starts off saying, as long as the heir is a child, he does not differ at all from a slave, although he is owner of everything. So the child, okay, now
What verse is that?
that's verse 1. So the child and the slave do not differ. So we could think about what we just looked at back in Leviticus, where it deals with the idea of the child and the slave not different, where the Israelite who became impoverished, could be put into servitude, but it wasn't forever. There was a inheritance, you can say, to look forward to. When he got to a certain point, here we're looking at the child, growing up, when he becomes old, and when he gets to the place, whatever the father says there's going to be, when he gets to a predetermined place, he's going to gain something at the end. Just like, but the
servant would gain what was
until he
due.
got to that place. Until he got to that place, he was just going to be just somebody who was just moving according to the owner, whatever the owner said. The owner will be the father, who's going to move and do whatever it was that the owner says do.
That's why I like the word autonomy. Because if you're a servant of someone, you're not autonomous.
Right. Or the child.
Yeah. Like a child isn't autonomous.
No.
You gotta do what you say.
He better do everything I say. Right? Right? Because as of right now, he does not differ from a slave. Although he is the owner of everything. Right? Okay, so verse 2. But he is under guardians and managers until the date set by his father. Right? So it's the same idea here. The slave, again, we're not talking about perpetual servitude. There's a time that we're looking forward to when this debt is cleared, where you can go off and be, as Tirza says, autonomous, right? But for now, you're going to be under the rule of the owner, of the parent, or of the, Paul here is using these Greek terms where he says, but he is under guardians and managers. Guardians and managers. Tutors or governors in some translations, as it reads. The tutor or the guardian means instructor. This here lexicon definition I have here says, but it's not. This is not quite the sense of the original. The word epitropis probably means a steward, a manager, or agent. As used here, it refers to one, usually a slave or a freedman, to whose care the boys of a family were committed, who trained them up, accompanied them to school, or sometimes instructed them at home. Such a one would have the control of them.
So is that like kind of like a nanny who?
Yeah, I guess the only thing we could think about in these times is kind of a nanny, which would potentially be kind of a teacher and somebody who was over top of the person. You were going to do what this person said, and you was going to kind of be controlled, instructed, led by this tutor. right? So again, also he uses this other word, which is similar, but he doesn't. He using this other word that's translated as governors and managers. Is it managers in your New American Standard? I think that's what it says. I think that's what that is there. Manager, yeah. But the word means for governor means a house manager or overseer and steward. It carries kind of the same. It carries kind of the same definitions as the other word, but it's a totally other word. It properly refers to one who had authority over the slaves or servants of a family to assign them to their tasks and portions. They generally also had the management of the affairs of the household and of the accounts. They were commonly slaves and were entrusted with the office as a reward for fidelity, though sometimes free persons were employed. So this one seems to be more so not dealing with the family members, but with the servants of the family. Whereas
like a foreman.
Right, but in regards to the servants of the family. So it seems as if the tutors or the guardians were the ones who dealt with the family members, the younger family members, and the governors were the ones who dealt with the servants of the family, which again, Paul's bringing up both the children and the slaves.
So it's not like for the same people. The tutors is for the family.
That's what it seems like.
The governors or the managers is for the servants.
I'm just saying that based on this keyword study definition of the words. They're giving you the things and connecting it to one, they're connecting to the family members, the other one they're connecting to the servants. And it makes sense because Paul was bringing up both, where they're both really in the same situation, but they have different ones over them, but the ones that are over them really are doing the same things.
So the managers is kind of like a manager at work or government, or like what I was saying. If you're at your job,
yeah. If you're a construction person, then it's a foreman.
Or if you're white collar, like I was.
Yeah, it's just like a little
manager, supervisor.
Yeah. Right. Okay, so that was verse 2, verse 3. So also we, while we were children, were held in bondage under the elemental things of the world. So also we, while we were children, speaking of, back to the child, we were held in bondage under the elemental things of the world. So again, we think about this idea of being under something or someone or something is being subject to the control or the control and the direction. Subject to their control and direction is this idea of being under. So you were subject to the control or direction of the governors and the tutors or the guardians or the managers. But as children, you were held under or subject to the control or the direction of the elemental things of the world. So when we think about this whole idea of this whole thing with this elemental things of the world, we think about the places where we see this here brought up, this whole idea of elemental these things. Yes, because we also see in verse 9 where it says back again to the weak and worthless elemental things. Verse 9 it says, but now that you have come to know Elohim, or rather be known by Elohim, how is it that you turn back to the weak and worthless elemental things? Now, when we look at that, and then we go back at verse 3, where it talks about while we were children, we were under bondage, under the elemental things of the world. What do we think that might be even in reference to? This whole thing about being in bondage to these elemental things of the world. I mean, because what we can't do is say that this necessarily is referring to the law, to the Torah, is the weak and worthless elemental things is the law.
I mean, is that talking about our own? We was kind of trying to do things on our own strength.
Well, when we think about the idea of these elemental things of the world, I guess when we look at children, it's a perfect example, right? Because the children are not able to do anything, right? They have to be told everything, right? They have to be shown and directed every move that's made, right? They have they can do nothing but be moved and directed from an external force, which is a type of bondage, right? It's a type of bondage, just like we talked about credit, right? Where you're not able to do things based on your own doing, right? You need someone else to do the thing, and you pay them back for it, right? You when you're working for somebody, you're not able to generate your own income. You have to go and work for somebody else and get income from them. It's not kind of a self-generated thing, right? So and a child has to grow and learn and be taught, how to even live. If nobody teaches the child anything, he won't know anything, and he won't be able to live, right?
They won't survive for that long.
We're not like animals where they can just plop out and then all of a sudden they know they're supposed to run from the cheetahs. Just by instinct.
Play with a cheetah,
right?
You might try to play with a cheetah too.
So when we think about us as being as children, right, we're held in bondage to the elemental things of this world. All the things that are incorporated in this world, which begins with our flesh and our carnality, right? As being human beings, right? Where we have these basic needs, and again, as children, we have to be taught all of these basic needs by by the outside forces. So he's building on something here. He's making a point and connecting it to this whole idea of being a child, of being a servant, being under guardians and managers, and being in this type of bondage of these outside influences. Verse 4, but when the fullness of time came, Elohim sent forth his son, born of a woman, born under the law, so that he might redeem those that were under the law, that we might receive the adoption as sons. So again, he hit us with the adoption and the sons. He already talked about being heirs as children, but being like slaves. So he's hitting us with these concepts of inheritances and how we're treated, whether we're treated like a son or like a servant, or how the similarities between being a son and a servant, and maybe the difference being if you're a servant and not a child, you don't have inheritance necessarily coming from that family, right? There's a disconnect, right? So he brings it in with Yeshua, who of course came into flesh. He came and then put himself under the elemental things of this world. He put himself under.
He was born a baby.
Right. He started from the beginning and put himself into this place, right? And was born under the law, right? He came into flesh as an Israelite, so that he might redeem those who were under the law.
So is that under the law?
Under the law, right? So we talked about, again, being subject to the control and direction of the law, right? So Yeshua was born of a woman, born under the subjection to the control and direction of the law. And he came to redeem those who were under and subjection to and control and direction of the law, that we might receive the adoption as sons. Verse 7 says, therefore you are no longer, speaking to the people, right? Therefore you are no longer a slave, but a son. And if a son, then an heir through Elohim. So again, we think about this whole idea of being a son or a slave. We think about this idea of being a son or a slave. We think back now, there was a difference. There was a difference between the slave and the son. There's a difference between the countryman and the foreigner. Right? So we can just say that the countryman is the son and the foreigner was the slave. In the place of servitude, in the place of the servitude, if you wasn't a son or a countryman, there wasn't no heir to be had. Right? You was in a place that was forever on the outside. It wasn't like you was able to make it to redemption. Redemption didn't come for you as that one who was the stranger.
You didn't get a year of Jubilee.
Jubilee didn't mean anything to you. Right? So he's given us these, and he's talking to these people who have an understanding, right, of these commands that we're looking at, right? So therefore you are no longer a slave. You change from being that slave, if it were possible. You change from being that stranger, that slave, that servant, to a son. And if you're a son, then you're an heir. Right? You go from being in a place without inheritance to a place with inheritance.
So you'll eventually be able to transition into the same place as your parent, your father,
as an heir. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So you become. So what he's saying is that when Yeshua, people was able to go jump from the one tank to the other.
Yeah. Right. So because of his son that was born of a woman under the law, so that he might redeem those that were under the law, that we might receive the adoption as sons. So the thing that Yeshua was doing caused you to be treated as a son. The thing that Yeshua came to do caused you to be treated as a son and not a slave. So he says, therefore, you are no longer a slave. You no longer that former position. Now you're into the position of being an heir and receiving these. You got a handful of that. And receiving the inheritance from the Father. But again, now we get to verse 9 again. But now that you have come to know Elohim, or rather be known by Elohim, how is it that you turn back again to the weak and worldly elemental things to which you desire to be enslaved all over again?
So that means you want to go back over to that other category of serving.
Of serving.
What verse was that again?
That's verse 9 and 10.
Good check. Good check.
That's verse 9 and 10. Right? So whatever these people was doing was causing Paul to speak to them in this way and say to them that you want to turn back and change back status. You was a slave. You was a slave. And then you was made a son, but you want to turn back to servitude.
You want to go back to being a slave.
You want to go back to being a slave. Verse 10, you observe days and months and years and seasons and years. Oh boy, here we go.
I think that's the Torah.
So he's what's he saying? Is he saying that you sitting up here and keeping the commandments?
That's what people say. That you went back to keeping the Torah, so.
But I think when we look at this, when we look at this, we have to think about it and put it into perspective. We think about what he's talking about as far as being under the law, being under guardians and managers, being under these elemental things of the world, being back to these weak and worthless elemental things. He's dealing with and being a slave is being pushed and directed and motivated by external forces. So when we think about even the difference between the old covenant and the new covenant, the law is the same. Yahweh's commands don't change. Yet what Yahweh considers to be righteousness never change. That's unchanging. We can't sit up here and say that it's necessarily wrong to observe days and months and seasons and years. Right? We can't sit up here and make those kinds of claims. But I think when we think about this idea of being under guardians and managers and what these people was trying to do in terms of putting people under the law is I can't make you keep Yahweh's commandments. I can't, this external force, I can't cause you to do the things of Yahweh and treat it as if you don't do these things, then you can't be in the kingdom.
You can't be a guardian over something.
Right. Who has become a son. Right, who has become free. Right, who has moved away from that external force. the thing about it is that once we understand that the new covenant is the law in your heart, it makes it impossible for these verses here to mean what people think it means, but it's not that far away. It's not that far away from what they think it means. As if to say, bringing it back to the idea of justification, as to where I'm saying, if you don't do this, that, and the other thing, if you don't got no strings hanging off of your clothes, you can't be saved. If you sit up here eating pork, I'm telling people, if you sit up here eating pork, you can't be saved. You gotta stop eating pork so that you can be be in the kingdom. You got to start doing this, that, and the other thing so you can be in the kingdom.
A list.
Right. Whatever the list is, whatever the things that you want to put on the list are, you putting those things on the list and, putting people
into subjection,
into bondage. Right. The law itself is not bondage. The law is not bondage, but when you bind yourself to the law, in other words, I'm doing these things so that I can be saved, right? You looking at it from a wrong perspective. And furthermore, if I want to say, if I want to put myself under the old covenant, I'm guilty. I'm walking around nothing but guilty, but because I can't even fulfill it.
Well, if you're a Gentile, you're even in worse condition.
Right. So if we want to put, as he's talking about here, these weak and worthless elemental things, it's not the law necessarily. Can't be the law, right, that he's speaking of, but he's dealing with the idea of your relationship, how your relationship is established. Is it established based on you and your external pushes, your external stimuli, or are we dealing with the internal spirit, the Ruach HaKodesh? Right? If I gotta forever be telling you what it is that you best be doing, what's that spirit doing in you?
It's not really moving.
It's not doing anything, right? So you're going back to the time where, looking at Israel being under the law, where you're being subject to the external force, which is the law, statutes, and commandments of Yahweh.
Okay.
So, then he goes into the different things that happening to him, going on, and him wanting to get back to them all the way down to 21. Tell me, you who want to be under the law. Again, this idea of being under.
I think sometimes people want to let people tell them what to do. I mean,
I guess people do kind of sometimes want people to tell you what to do.
It makes it easier for you because all you gotta do, is follow what they say. Like if somebody tell you step by step how to do something,
right?
It's easier than you.
But the problem with that is that you don't have an understanding of the Father, because all you doing is basing your life off of somebody else's
relationship.
Yeah, and interpretation. So It's got to be able to get to the place where you're able to be led of the Father, where you're able to hear from the Father, and as a result of your relationship, walking in righteousness. Not doing things and thinking that you doing those things is causing you to be in the kingdom or safe. But it's a response. Your walk in righteousness is a response to what has been done for you by Yeshua. We can't sit up here and think that Yeshua don't want us to walk in righteousness. Right? If you love me, keep my commandments. That's what he said. Like this is in red letters. Right? He literally said that. When we walk in righteousness, when we walk as Yeshua walked, we keep the commandments. But it's a fine line that's walked where we are we working for our salvation? Are we working for our salvation, or do we actually have a relationship with the Master and are walking out this life, as a life of gratitude? Right? There's a difference. Right? And I'm sitting up here trying to look at all these laws, statutes, and commands that, in this life, in this place where we are over here, we can't even do that law. Right? So
most of it
when Paul says up there and talks about the spirit and the letter, right, we have to be able to understand what that is dealing with, because we're not following the Torah according to the letter of the law, because
keep the feast days.
We're not in the right place for that.
Not in the land. We're
not in the land. We don't have any priesthood. We don't have any temple. We ain't brought sacrifice to first. All of these things that we can't even do.
No, that's everybody's saying. Like a biblical sacrifice.
So what we have to be able to do, and what the new covenant is about doing, is getting us to the place of walking out the spirit of the law. The spirit of the law. We look at these commands, they're showing us attributes and characteristics and teaching us things. The character of the command, the underlying principle of the command. Right? This is where we are. But we had these people over here dealing with these people in Galatians who was probably not Israelites, where he's talking about putting them under the law, treating these people as if, because we saw a clear distinction between somebody who was a foreigner and who was a homeborn. Right? Some things we could look where we could say that there's one law for the stranger and for the homeborn, but other places we could see where there's differences. And one of those differences was again this idea of servitude. In that respect, if you was somebody who wasn't an Israelite, you could be in servitude for life. You could be the actual possession of another. But that wasn't the case for those who were homeborn. So Paul says, tell me, you who want to be under the law, do you listen to the law? Do you even know the law? Do you even know the law? And then he goes into the whole idea of Abraham and his sons, the bondwoman and the freed woman. And the idea that there's, they give us an examples of two covenants. Mount Sinai is connected to Hagar, where it's dealing with the bondwoman, right? And then we have but Jerusalem above is hold on. Now Hagar is Mount Sinai and Arabia, for she is in slavery with her children. But the Jerusalem above is free. She is our mother. For it is written, rejoice, barren woman, who does not bear, break forth and shout, you who are not in labor. For more are the children of the desolate than the one who has a husband. And it goes down, but as at the time he was born according to the flesh, persecuted him who 30. But what does the scripture say? Cast out the bondwoman and her son, for the son of the bondwoman shall not be an heir with the son of the free woman. So what we have to see here is Paul's not sitting up here talking against the Torah per se, but he's comparing here these two women and putting them with the idea of what he's been going through this whole time in terms of being in servitude and being a son, being somebody who has heirs, inheritance attached to them, and not. We look at these as covenants. The idea of the old covenant, he's equating with Hagar. He's equating with the bondwoman. Because when you think about the idea of the old covenant, not that it in and of itself is bondage, but it does put forth the idea of bondage or servitude, because it's about being directed or subject to an external force. So in that regard, it is bondage. So when we think about the idea of the bondwoman who's attached to the idea of the old covenant, which dealing with the law, statutes, and commandments, the Torah, the written law, is dealing with that external force, which Paul here is saying is bondage. The external force is that it's something on the outside of you directing you and pushing you and causing you to move in one way or another, right? The external force. So it's just like the credit card, right? It's just like the employer. You're doing something not of your own power and strength and will, right, but being directed from external forces. So in that regard, yes, is bondage. And when he's also he's saying that in regards to the inheritance, in regards to the inheritance, there's no inheritance connected to it. So there's no inheritance and connected to the old covenant. The covenant that is exemplified by Hagar, which is that which proceeded from Mount Sinai, the giving of the commandments to the people. Right?
That's kind of interesting, because that shows that this new covenant that we're in is just so much better, because there's actually an inheritance at this time.
The new covenant. Yeah. Right.
And there definitely wasn't an inheritance for the Galatians. Like if they was in the old covenant, they wasn't gonna get anything.
Right. If they was connected to the old covenant, yeah, they got nothing. They was the servants and not the child. Mm-hmm. So there was a time when the child was as a servant, mm-hmm. where he had a guardian. The guardian was the Torah. We look at Israel. Ancient Israel, old covenant Israel was the child. But when a child grows up, when it gets to the predetermined place of the father, then he gets to the place where he's no longer under the guardian, but now he's going to do all of the same stuff, but he don't got to have nobody tell him to do it. So if we do right with these kids over here, we be guardians and governors over them. Now I got to tell you, go over there. Stop doing that. Quit doing that. Go over there, pick that up, do this. I told you 5 times, blah, blah, blah. But if I keep on doing that, it's going to be a time where I'm going to say, all right, I'm done with you. Go ahead on and live your life.
They'll be able to do it. They'll still do those things that they was taught.
So
just on their own. You don't gotta be like, did you pay that bill?
From what I already did. From what I already did. So when we think about this idea of going back into bondage, this is what we're dealing with. We're talking about these people who, they 40 years old in the basement. They put themselves in bondage. Yeah. Hey, Mom, what's for dinner? I'm 40, but what's for dinner? Mom, right? You put yourself in bondage, right? When you've been free just by natural law made you free. You're grown. You can go out and live your life. You don't have to have your, that external push beneath you. Now again, we look over at what Paul's talking about, where he says in the beginning of verse 5, it was for freedom that Messiah set us free. Therefore, keep standing firm and do not be subject again to a yoke of slavery. And again, we're talking about a yoke of slavery. We're just dealing with being under the law, which is dealing with being, doing these things so that you can receive some prize, or forcing people to do a thing. Creating an environment where somebody's sitting up here and following after this external thing as opposed to an internal thing.
Yep.
Okay, so again, just closing down. I don't want to go too much further than this, but thinking about just the ideas here that we talked about in terms of servitude and freedom. Right? Yeshua didn't come. Yeshua didn't come for us to be back in the old covenant. Because when we think about it in the picture that Paul's giving forth, when we look at the mothers, when we look at Hagar, we look at Sarah, we look at the bondwoman, we look at the free woman, we look at the idea of moving. Because when you think about the bondwoman, first of all, there's never the bondwoman who is, the foreigner or the stranger. There's never an opportunity for that bondwoman to become the free woman. Right? The promise belonged to the other woman.
Yeah.
So when we think about that in terms of what Paul's talking about, when he's talking about the covenants, he's talking about servitude and being a child. When we look backwards at, where the old covenant gets us, it can only take you so far. The old covenant only can take you to a point. It was only meant to take you to a point. You was meant to be under the guardians and the managers until the date set by the fathers.
And I should have came at that date.
The Father is
Yahweh,
the Most High. Right? You were supposed to be under that until the date that was set by the Father. But it says, but when the fullness of time came, Elohim sent forth his son.
Yep. So that's the fullness of time right there.
Right. But we just have to, so it's a thin line. It's a thin line. Right? Yes, of course, we do the things that Yahweh likes. But we have to be able to be honest with ourselves and check our motivation. Why are you doing this?
No.
Why are you doing this? You doing this so I look a certain kind of way?
No.
Or you doing it because you love your shoe? You doing this because you feel like you getting some points or something? Like you stacking up some points in a bank or something? Or you doing it as a result of your relationship with the master? Right, so I think it's a perfect kind of example that he gives with this idea of being a child, right? Because that's the same thing that we do just in the natural world. We teach our children. We put boundaries in place. We show them how things are supposed to be, and then we let them go. And then they go, and then they live their life. Right, and then hopefully they're able to survive on their own. Hopefully. Right, but this thing that Yeshua has done, this thing that the Most High has done, right, takes that to the next level. Right, because now with that Ruach HaKodesh on the inside of you, is strengthening you. That internal force, changing your heart, changing your mind to the things that Yahweh that he likes, right? Putting that law on our hearts and not on tablets and stuff. Okay, so saying all that.
That's nice.
All right, so we will pause for now, come back next week and talk about some more stuff.
More scriptures.
Yeah.